Hey everyone, for those of you listening with kids around, I want to give you a quick note before we begin. While most episodes of More Than Before are family friendly, this one is best heard without little ears nearby. Some topics discussed are sensitive and could be emotionally triggering if you've experienced any similar situations. You're about to hear a powerful, transformational story of how God can redeem and turn any person's life into a miraculous journey. With that being said, get ready for this incredible conversation. Here's what's next on More Than Before.
I was gay, come out of the lifestyle. I'm a pastor. I get married. We get pregnant. Then we end up holding a 16-week baby in our hands. A miscarriage at 16 weeks. We saw our daughter. She had little gums. You see the teeny tiny little toes and fingers and the nails, the lips, a whole little body's formed. I'm holding Samantha in our hands. That has been the most devastating, hardest thing ever. We literally just wept and cried for a week.
Have you ever walked through something that you thought might break you, only to realize later on that it actually shaped you to be the person that you were created to be, and to serve people that you were called to serve? Today's guest has lived that kind of story. He's walked through loss, confusion, surrender, and renewal. And what God has done in his life is nothing short of a miracle and nothing short of powerful. He's a husband, a dad, a pastor, an author, and yes, he is an Ironman. But what stands out most isn't his achievements. It's his transparency, it's his honesty, and it's his faith. This conversation that you're about to hear is all about freedom, all about redemption, and what happens when you let God define who you're created to be. Jim Domen, welcome to More Than Before. It's great to have you on, brother.
Hey, Nathan, it's great to be on your show. And I loved your introduction. I think I'm gonna steal that and write that down. That was really good. Thank you.
There are people in life that you meet that have really gone through the ringer, and you can learn so much from them. And I know that your story is rich in a lot of different ways. But before we dive into more of the harder topics, I'd love to go back to early on in life when you were a kid. What were you like as a kid? What did you enjoy? What did you spend your time doing when you were younger?
I would say I was an awkward kid. I didn't do well in sports. My younger brother and younger sister, they excelled at everything. I didn't. So I was kind of a little socially awkward. I dressed, I don't know, I'll say funny, not like popular kids did. And, I look at pictures of me and go, good grief, how embarrassing. And so I just think I was really socially awkward. I mean, it wasn't like we had donation clothes or anything. I have nothing wrong with that. We actually, we use clothes donated all the time for our kids, but I was kind of geeky and nerdy and just really didn't fit in, didn't have a lot of friends. I mean, I knew a lot of people, but just never had a best friend. So yeah, I would say didn't really fit in, became more popular in life and which maybe I don't know if that's a good thing or not, but yeah, like my wife, we joke about we never would have been friends in high school. She was, in the band and I did sports. I did wrestling and football, more wrestling than football. Again, wrestling doesn't have balls. So I'm not too coordinated. So, I kind of stuck to that, Ironman. There was no balls in Ironman. You bike, you swim, you run, it's pretty basic. But yeah, we joked about, we wouldn't have been friends. She's like, yeah, you would have been too cool for me, but I wasn't cool in high school. That was another crowd. Maybe not till college did I kind of come out of my shell and a little bit more into my identity, as a cooler dude, I'll call it.
Yeah. So when you were wrestling, I'm curious, did you wrestle for a while, or was that like a short period of your story?
3 years, freshman,
Okay.
sophomore, junior year. My sophomore year, I placed, no, my junior year, I placed third in CIF. I was in Orange County, so I forget which division it was, but to place third in CIF is pretty significant. Although I didn't pursue wrestling, I actually wrestled varsity my sophomore and junior year. I didn't like my coach, and the coach that I loved left the school, and I'm like, I'm not going to do this anymore. So I bailed and didn't wrestle my senior year.
It's that's interesting because even early on, I mean, wrestling when you were growing up, when I was growing up, wrestling was a whole different thing. Like, like I remember my uncles, when they wrestled, they didn't have weight classes. It was, by the way, you're wrestling this guy, he's 300 pounds. I my uncles, one of my uncles was a Triple Crown champion, and so there was kind of a
Wow.
level of expectation when I came in, and they actually went to the same high school as me. But I remember cardio days. I remember those hard days that you had to push through. And I still remember one of my coaches. He was the worst. He was something else. Let's just say that. He would always say, "You don't leave this room unless you puke, faint, or you're bleeding." And
Yes.
there was truth in that.
Oh,
And
for
so I'm
sure. And
curious.
then, like I wrestled 152. So when I wrestled, they still have weight. They had weight classes. They still do today. Actually, my nephew placed like third in Texas or fourth in Texas at a Division 5 school, which is amazing as a junior.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I had a weight class, and the last 2 years, I think it's about. I started at 138 and then ended up at 152.
Okay. Wow, that's crazy. Yeah, it's interesting because once you start talking with people and you hear different pieces of their story, you're like, oh, I can actually see how this might even have actually helped you later on down the road. Like having that mentality, in wrestling, it's just you just bite your teeth and you go. So I'm curious, early on in high school, what did you find yourself involved in? Because you kind of said you're a little bit on the outside of things and maybe
So
didn't
I
have as many
I did
friends.
Yearbook, which is kind of nerdy. I wasn't a writer, so I didn't do like the newspaper journal kind of thing. But I was the yearbook editor, or very involved in junior high, seventh and eighth grade. And they typically at the high school level don't allow freshmen into the yearbook class. It's a sophomore and higher. But because of my background and experience, and I went to some of their campuses, actually involved in yearbook all 4 years at her high
Hmm.
school. So it's kind of the geeky, nerdy side, you know. But and again, like football didn't work out real well for me at the time. I didn't have that mentality, go kill them. I'm
Yeah.
just, I love Jesus, and I don't want to go and kill people. And I'm not saying you can't be a Christian and be a, rough, tough football player, but that just wasn't me. I hadn't matured, kind of grown into my body, so to speak. I mean, shoot, I was 152 as a junior and senior. I was skin and bones. I didn't have really muscle structure. That didn't come until college, and I've got okay arms now, but that comes later in life. So
Well, I'm not going to show
I
you
didn't
mine
I
because
did
that's
not
going to be
have that
sad.
in college or high school. That's for sure.
So when you accepted Jesus at the age of 7, what brought you to that decision?
You know, I would say it was like childlike faith. My parents had recently come to know the Lord. And I kind of remember it 2 times at a conversation with my mom. We did it in Sunday school, when I was, 7, it's about first grade. And I just felt moved, to accepting the Lord. And at that age, you don't realize, I didn't realize I had the gift of evangelism, but I just had this burden on my heart that I wanted the world to know Jesus. I wanted everybody to know God so they would go to heaven and not hell. And, how does a kid articulate that? I don't know, but that was my heart. I wanted everybody to know Jesus. So I
Yeah.
would say it was a very legitimate acceptance, if that makes sense. I knew God from
Yeah.
a young age and have walked with Him my whole life.
So what were your aspirations as a child? Like what did you want to be? What was the desire? What was the goal when you were younger?
So we had a cleaning lady, and she cleaned our house on a weekly basis. And she goes, Jim, this is the only house I clean where a kid has all their goals up posted above their bed. And in essence, it was to be rich, buy or own a Mercedes, have a ranch with horses, and it kind of all these material things. That was kind of my goal as a kid. And the cleaning lady was really funny because she's like, "You're the only house where a kid's got all his goals up there." But that was kind of me. I was an entrepreneurial, very motivated, wanted to make a lot of money, be successful in life. I mean, I was in honors and APIB, advanced placement, international baccalaureate. Now, I wasn't like a brainy, brilliant genius kind of a kid. I had to work really hard for good grades, but I had a higher than a 4.0 all through high school. So
Yeah.
I was academic and a little athletic.
Hmm. So in high school, you started to feel, if I'm remembering correct, you started to feel kind of like the odd duck. You felt out of water. You felt different from everyone else. Uh, tell
Yeah.
everyone a little bit more about that.
Yeah, kind of. Well, in junior high is when I first started realizing I was same sex attracted. I was attracted to older men, but I didn't really know what to do with that. And then, kind of when puberty hit more my sophomore year, I was 16, 15, 16 in high school. I was like, wait a minute, how come I'm attracted to my own sex, you know? I think I'm gay, or I think I'm a homosexual. I didn't even think I knew what the word gay meant. I knew homosexuality and knew that was wrong, but, I didn't know what to do with that.
How did environment play into that?
So I truly believe that environment is the reason why people deal with LGBTQ issues,
Mm.
specifically for homosexuality, a disconnect between the father and the son. That generally happens early in childhood development, like from the ages of 2 to 4, 18 months, kind of the 36, 48 months
Mm.
range, where a little boy begins to build and understand his identity as a boy and that connection with their dad. And a lot of times, if that doesn't happen, or there's a trauma or an abuse situation or something like that, for me, now it wasn't trauma or abuse. My dad was an LA County sheriff. I just didn't connect with him with sports, with a variety of different things. And he more or less connected with my brother, could talk baseball, football, coach him in all these sports. And the reason why I did sports in high school was because my dad said, well, if you go to high school, you have to play a sport. So I
Mm.
tried football, that didn't work. And so for obvious reasons, as I've shared earlier, and then I'm like, well, my dad wrestled. I'll try to be like my dad and wrestle. So it really wasn't a passion from me. It was trying to honor my dad because that's what he wanted me to do. And
Mm.
what I try to tell dads, and if there's a dad listening to this podcast, Nathan, do what your son, your kid, your daughter wants to do. Don't make them what you want to do. Let them come alongside your child and support and encourage them. Don't have them do what you think they ought to do, if that makes sense. And
Yeah.
that was kind of my situation, and looking back, it would have been so helpful to have my dad come alongside of me and go, "Son, what are you passionate about? What do you
Mm.
wanna do?" He this came up, we were in our spa one evening, my mom and dad, and I said, "Mom, Dad, I wanna go to Europe." And my dad's like, "What? Why do you wanna go to France?" And he goes, "You want to learn French? Are you stupid? Everyone in LA speaks, Espanol. Why are you going to learn French?" I'm like, "Well, because I think if you live in America, you should speak English. So I'm not going to cater to that. And two, I want to go to Europe. I don't want to go to Mexico or South America. I want to go to Europe." And he's like, "Why would you even want to leave the United States?" This is my dad thinking,
Mm.
why would you ever want to leave this great country and go? I'm like, and again, we're just different, but he didn't know how to come alongside of me. Now I got to go to France as a 16-year-old on an exchange program, which was awesome, but he didn't know how to come alongside of me. Again, I'm kind of this odd duck, scratching his head. Why you wanting to do all the stuff that doesn't make logical or rational sense?
Mm. I'm curious also your relationship with your mom. How is your relationship with your mom? I know she was a librarian. So like
Yeah.
you have this educational side, maybe some pressure around there to do well, which sounds like you were actually a good student. But how was your relationship with your mom? I mean, your dad was a little bit estranged, it feels like, or strained, I guess I should
Yes.
say.
Sure. Yep. That's probably a good adjective. And I was very tight and close with my mom when she was pregnant, like with my sister, 7 years younger. When my dad was working nights or was gone, I would care for my mom. I was kind of in that role as a caregiver because she was sick and nauseous all the time from morning sickness. And I was very, very tight and close with my mom. And again,
Mm,
when boys start developing that tight bonding with mom and not dad and men, they start seeing the world through the eyes of the feminine. And it's not like it's a, here, let me give you these binoculars. And now I'm looking through the world, through binoculars. So it's making me look feminine, but you start taking on, you start seeing the world through the feminine. And you don't even realize, again, this is developmental, that this is happening, and I'm not getting called out from boyhood to manhood. My identity is connecting with the feminine and the feminine
mm,
side of things as a little boy or, developing young man. I was very tight and close with my mom, and she
mm,
was the spiritual giant as I was in the house. My dad lacked that leadership spiritually growing up. If there's a
mm.
spiritual, my dad, I tried to have a sex talk with my dad, and I brought up the topic because I'm like, my therapist is like, "Hey, this would be a good thing for you to have a talk you and your dad to have," and we never had it. And when I
Mm,
asked him, he told me it was inappropriate. So, well, if my dad tells me it's inappropriate, well, what he literally told me was, "Well, if you want to learn about sex, you learn about it in the locker room." And I'm
hmm.
like thinking, okay, my dad's a Christian, and he's telling me to learn about something God created that's beautiful for procreation, and it's a gift to men and women, and I'm gonna learn about it in the locker room? I don't
Mm.
think that was God's intention for sex and marriage. But that's what I got when I now that's all kinda changed at the age of 28. I had that talk again with my dad, and I gave it, but that was part of my healing and restorative process to kinda revisit areas of my or periods of my life that I had missed or wasn't fed or didn't receive what I needed to as a boy, that
Mm.
thankfully, as a grown man, I was able to, minister to some of those areas of my life.
I love what you say there about having the conversation with your dad, and I would imagine your son is starting to get older, and there's going to be a time where you have that conversation too. But
Yep.
there really is this importance of having that conversation. We live in a world that is super hyper sexualized for everything, and it's interesting too, kind of the different perspectives between your mom and your dad. Your dad being Catholic and your mom being Protestant. Like, within Catholicism, you don't talk about the physical and sex and those kinds of things. Whereas, more Protestant, probably going to talk about those things. It's going to be at least brought up. But there
Yep.
really is a key within men stepping into their stepping in and having a conversation with their son of what does marriage look like? What does sex look like in good confines of what God created it to be? And I think that we see that
Amen.
a lot in society. A lot of kids are not getting the sex talk. They're not getting a conversation of, what is a healthy relationship.
Or they may not be getting it from mom and dad, but they're getting it through commercials, television
Mhm.
shows, and specifically, on phones and digital devices. There that content, I mean, I listened to some statistics, so with, like, Meta, how within, 72 hours, teenage boys are exposed to drugs, sex, and the logarithms know what they like, what they don't like, and they keep feeding it. It's so sinister, but that's a whole
Yeah.
nother conversation. But I'll take a step back, that we don't have television in our home. I mean, what you might think of this as, totally archaic, but you know what? We don't have television in our home. Our kids do not have any devices. They're 11, 9, and 7. And so they're not exposed to explicit content. They're not exposed to sexual content. They're not exposed to LGBTQ agendas and social media and apps telling kids that, you can transition or you can do who knows what. And thankfully, they've been protected and shielded from the world. And these talks, my wife was able to have that talk with my oldest, my daughter, and she was the first one to have the sex conversation with her. And I think she
Mm.
did that when she was about 10 or 11. Anyway, it was within like the last 6 months or so. And it was a beautiful, and what brought this on is, we have a friend that's pregnant, and, they're talking about her pregnancy and how the baby's growing inside. And my oldest daughter goes, "How did the baby get in her tummy?" And so
Here's
my
the
wife was like,
window.
"Okay." Yes, exactly, exactly. And my 2 younger kids, they're not really they're not really ready for that conversation, but my wife just knew, okay, it's time, and she was able to share all of those details with my daughter through a couple of different meetings. They had a mommy-daughter getaway time with just the 2 of them. They went shopping, had the talk about having periods, menstrual cycles, and, bodies developing and changing and what that looks like. And I'm like, what a beautiful, godly example
Mm,
and how to role model that to our children so they have healthy sexual identities in whom God made my daughter as a girl, but who will develop into a beautiful woman and understands that sex is something that God's given us to procreate for pleasure, but that's between a man and a woman in a marriage only setting. And, I'm going to do the same thing with my son when that moment's come. And it's probably will come before he's 11. I'll say that. So, and I'm looking forward to having that talk with him, but this isn't like a one and done thing. We've been talking about these types of things from when they were little. My
mm.
youngest daughter, that was kind of hilarious. Our dog was a male, and she kind of said, "Oh, girls have vaginas and boys have peanuts." Because she couldn't say the word penis. And so it was just hilarious that Tucker has a peanut. You're like, "Yes, and Daddy has a peanut too." But she couldn't say the word. So, but we have these kind of conversations, so it's not like, oh, we've said vagina or penis or something.
Yeah,
It's biological. And
yeah,
God made a boy and a girl, and both are good.
yeah. I love that. So going back to your story, you graduate from high school and you then trek off to Oregon to go
Yeah,
to
your
George
neck of the
Fox,
wood.
my neck of the woods, George Fox University, to get a degree in communication. What was
No,
the focus?
actually international business and economics.
Okay, international business and economics. So what was the what were you wanting to do with that?
Get rich.
I'm seeing a trend here. No.
You know, Yeah, yeah. I really wanted to go into the business world. I loved it, and I loved international travel. Going to France at 16, I was like, "This is awesome. I want to do that." And then till now, I've been to over 40 countries, and I've traveled the world. I've lived in different countries, and it's awesome. And I will tell you, and I'm going to quote Dorothy: "There's no place like home." There's no place like the United States in the world, and we are really blessed. Even when we had the Biden administration in office, it's still the greatest country on the planet, and I've been to a lot of countries.
What started to spiral in your life in terms of identity at that point?
So my therapist really encouraged me to pursue masculinity in college, and I did. It was kind of like a restart. Not that I was feminine. Maybe some people would be like, "Oh yeah, that he's gonna end up gay or is gay." Maybe that persona I gave off, but I really worked on from 18 and on pursuing masculinity. But then, and again, when I remember, I'll never forget, I told one of my friends that I was gay from college. They're all George Fox then was a conservative Christian school. I think they've gone liberal like most. But she was like, "Jim, you lied to us." And I told her, I said, "Look, Elizabeth, if I would have told you that I was gay or struggling with same-sex attraction, how do you think you and everybody else would have responded? You get kicked out of the school if you acted on any of those desires or things." And so they kind of at first thought I had lied to them. And then they kind of thought, "Oh yeah, that's right. It probably wouldn't have gone over very well. You would have been ostracized." So I said, "Yeah, I decided not to let anyone know about this, internal battle and struggle I had for so many years." But it was after college at the age of 23 when I took a job in Bermuda and then I mean, I was a virgin, but I was fired and accused of being a homosexual. Now,
Mm,
homosexuality at the time was illegal, and the man that I worked with was worth scores, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. And he's like, "Look, dude, this is gonna jeopardize my tax-free haven. I can't be or associated with you. I'm asking you to leave." And
mm.
so in essence, I kind of got kicked off the island. before that was a show. Anyway, so I came back to the United States, and thanks for laughing at my stupid joke. I came back to the United States, and I said, well, hey, if I'm going to be ostracized for being gay, I think I'm just going to come out. And I came out in your neck of the woods, Portland, downtown Portland,
Yeah.
and what we called Gaydom. Now I think they changed the street name. Oh my gosh, they changed the street name. I forgot what it used to be called, but that was Gaydom, the little, the few blocks there in actually, it's Southwest Portland, where the
Mm.
little gay area is, which I still think it's still there today.
So you dive into this lifestyle, and what's kind of interesting to me is I think it pulls a lot of people, more than what people really understand and realize. And I'm
Mhm.
curious, like, what drew you deeper? I mean, I know you said that, the moment in Bermuda, and then deciding just to come out and live the way that you want to live, in the way that you believed at the time that you were designed for that. But what drew you in, and what kept you captive in that lifestyle?
Oh, great question. Well, if you look at homosexuality as a development issue, which I really believe it's environment, it's psychological. You're not born that way. There's no gay gene or anything like that. And we can talk about that later too. It's genetically and statistically impossible to have the number of LGBTQ people we do today in less than a generation if we're saying this is genetic. So in the
Mm.
left won't say this, but it's so clear that it's environment. It's astounding. But when you have that type of lack of connection with your dad and you've bonded with your mom, when you hit puberty, your wires are crossed. You're looking through the world through the eyes of the feminine, and what you secretly yearn and desire is that connection, that male bonding, relational connectedness, which is all natural and normal, but it becomes sexualized. And so
Mm.
when you cross that threshold to you have a legitimate need, and then you meet it sexually, it's like, oh, you have an itch that gets scratched. Oh, that feels good. I must be gay. This must be who I am. And you
Mm.
begin taking on an identity that's really based on false lies, because yes, you are meeting a need, but it's destroying you in the process. And you're
Mm.
almost blinded by that because you're so lonely or so desperate to connect with the man, it becomes sexualized. Instead of, that's not what real men do. That's not true masculinity. Men don't
Mm.
do that with one another, if that makes sense. And so, but yet you're so broken in desiring that relationship, you cross boundaries and you find other men that are willing to do the same.
So you live this lifestyle for 5 years, and it gets to a point where it's just tumultuous. And what happens in that point? Because you literally lose everything just overnight. Um,
Yeah.
what what happened within that? And then how did you start to kind of almost pick up the pieces, I guess?
Yeah. So, I started realizing I had no idea what codependency was. And
Mm.
I started going to Al-Anon. And actually the people who go to Al-Anon are sicker than the addicts who go to Alcoholics Anonymous drugs. My partner was an alcoholic, addicted to pot, smoked cigarettes like a chimney. And I kind of get battered wife syndrome, because now I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm in this relationship. I don't want to leave. I'm being abused verbally, but realizing my partner is an alcoholic, a pothead. And so I start going to Al-Anon, going and hearing these other stories. I'm like, you people are crazy to put up with this kind of stuff. And then I'm like, wait a minute. I'm crazy. I'm packed. I'm leaving. I'm not an addict. I don't have these things. I'm not codependent. I can survive on my own. And I literally had made arrangements to leave. But before all that actually happened, my partner, I had dyed my eyebrows and eyelashes black, and anyway, changed my appearance, and my partner freaked out. He's like, get out of the house. I said, hey, not a problem. I'm leaving anyway. I already have a spot. So I move out, and he files a restraining order and takes all the money out of our account. We had a business account, and literally overnight, I went from everything to nothing except debt
Mm.
on credit cards. But during that time, I called the 2 Christian friends, the only 2 Christian friends that visited me in my sinful lifestyle, because either other people didn't know or Christians didn't have anything to do with me. I actually reached out to them and told them what was happening.
Mm,
And also the friend that called me and asked me, "Hey, Jim, have you been reading your Bible? How can I pray for you?" And before this happened, I called Michelle. I told her, "I'm afraid God will change me if I read his word." But
mm,
I never admitted this in the lifestyle, and this is why I say I've always walked with God. Well, I might have left God, but he never left me. He still spoke to me. I still heard his voice. When I was in the lifestyle, we have free will and we can choose to live our lives for God or not. And I chose not to live for him.
mm. How important was that those two people were open to having that conversation and to hear where you were and what you were going through? Because I do find it very interesting that, Christians are the worst when it comes to caring for their own. We like to take them
Yeah.
behind the barn and shoot them rather than,
Yeah.
rather than caring for them. Our pastor likes to say a lot that people come into the church and they go, "You're a bunch of hypocrites," and you're like, "If you only knew the half of it." Like, we're
Yeah.
way worse than what you
Yeah.
think, because we all struggle with things. But how important was that to have people within the faith being open to hearing where you're at and to be able to embrace you, not necessarily the sin piece, but to embrace who you
Yeah.
are as a person?
Well, and kind of to that, I did have one friend from college. I was in Texas traveling through, I think my brother's wedding, and they had said, yeah, she said, yeah, you can come stay with us. And then, en route, I'm driving there. I think I was coming up from Austin to the Dallas Fort Worth area. I get a phone call and I was told, hey, you can't come to our house because, of your lifestyle.
Mm,
And that was so hard, it just broke my heart. I mean, I went out that night and acted out sexually. I
mm,
was hurt, that's what I was gonna do, and I'm like, again, this is kinda, Christians, I think we have a tendency to take, and shoot our own. But my buddy, my best friend, Chris from college, still to this day, he actually came down, visited me a couple of times, and I'm like, "Hey, you can stay at our house. You've got a guest bedroom." And he's like, "No, I'm not, I'm not gonna stay at your house, but I'll meet your partner. We can go out and have dinner or whatever, or you check out your business." And Michelle and her husband did the same thing. Chris and his wife did the same thing. They came, they met us, we hung out, we had a meal, and I said, "Hey, you guys, we've got a guest bedroom.
mm,
You're welcome to." "Oh no, that's okay." But they still, came to the messy part. That's what Jesus did. He came and ate with sinners, with the people that the elites, the religious people wanted nothing to do with. That's what my friends were. They were the only Jesus I saw. They came, they
yeah.
sat with me, they had a meal with me, and yet when I was broken and, lost everything, guess who I called? I called
Mm,
them. Now I told them what had happened, but kind of what I wasn't saying was, "You better start praying for me because God's doing something and changing my life, and you guys better start praying and interceding for me." And Chris actually was like, "Hey, Jim, we're going back to the farm in Pennsylvania to do hay and chop wood and plant oats and all that. Why don't you come back and come to the farm?" And I did.
mm.
And it was the first time I'd gone to church. I did, hung out with all the men, bail, note to self, a stupid Californian, you don't take your shirt off when you're baling hay,
No,
and
that's
stacking
a
hay
horrible night.
because yeah, you will be in the bathtub with Epsom salts and oats trying to stop from itching. But I'm like, hey, the sun's out, shirts off. And that was, live and learn. But that's a city boy, working on a farm. But that was so healing and getting me out of the Palm Springs, back to gaydom, the whole gay homosexual environment, and into normalcy. That here's
Mm,
what men and women do. This is what a family looks like. Men work hard. Women are, at home doing the meals, and just it was beautiful and very restorative. And when I came back, I was like, okay, Lord, my parents were saying, "Come back home, son." And I'm like, "I'm not going back home. I'm 28. I've lived the world. I had a business, my own home, and I've lost everything." And and part of me is like, as soon as I get right back to my feet, I'm gonna go right back into the lifestyle. But God had
mm.
another plan. and I submitted to what he wanted for my life. I moved in with my parents and began to heal and restore the father-son relationship,
Mm.
the mother-son relationship, and I couldn't get enough of God. I was going to 3 different churches and just getting cleansed by the word and men's Bible studies and really trying just to, get cleaned up, so to speak, and get my life back together.
Yeah, it's really amazing kind of how you talk about that. And then especially as you talk about, I want to be rich, I want to make a lot of money. And you're at this point where you have no money, right? And you're going to Gold's Gym and you look down and there's a $5 bill.
Yep.
What was the shift point with that $5 bill that really made an impact in your life?
That you know what? That God saw me in my desert, literally. Not only, in Palm Springs, but desert meaning no money, no nothing. God saw me and that he would provide to meet my needs. I mean, so when
Mm.
I got served a restraining order from my partner, now mind you, this has been thrown out of court, expunged because it was nothing was substantiated. It was actually it was a fraud because you can't file a false police report. But the policewoman that served me was a believer.
Mm.
And like I start having this conversation with her, and I'm like, yeah, I know I was doing things that I shouldn't do, meaning, acting out
Yeah.
in a homosexual way. And she's like, you're not like the normal people we serve. Well, we ended up becoming friends. She was in my wedding, actually. I had a partner wedding. And again, most people don't become friends with police officers after they've been served restraining orders. Um, but God just kind of, again, just was doing this restorative work and brought people like that. And that, again, back to the $5, there was this other gal that I started telling her about Jesus. There's no name more mighty and more powerful than the name of Jesus. And she was like freaked out that I was telling her this. And I'm like, yeah, and I have no money. I can't even turn on electricity because I need a deposit. And she goes, here's $100. Gave me $100 bill. Didn't even know me. But she goes, I
Mm.
want to help you so you can turn on electricity. And in Palm Springs in June, it's hotter than you know what. And
Yeah.
so I only went like one night without electricity, meaning air conditioning. It cools off to like a mere 100 degrees at night. So again, God just kept providing and bringing people and surrounding me in my life of sin, so to speak, but he was
Mm.
delivering me through the process. And I
Wow.
just think it's a beautiful thing.
It really is. So when did you decide to go to Azusa Pacific then?
Well, that was the last thing I wanted to do. Have anything to do with the church. Because I wanted to be Jesus, to a lost and dying world, to people who really needed him. And that was really my heart. And to me, that was not the church. But my mentor for about 10 years, that he and I met on a weekly basis, said, Jim, what if you could go and help equip the church how to respond to LGBTQ issues? And I was like, "Oh, that makes sense. That's kind of strategic. That would help my voice, make my voice be a little bit more exponential than just one voice speaking. I could equip pastors and others on these topics, and prophetically so, that's all come into fruition. And I've done this on a global platform for a couple of decades now.
Mm.
And I'm right now, I'm part of the global Rainbow Crossers Alliance. We have 70 nations of former LGBTQ people, that are walking with God and have had their lives radically transformed and have come out of, the whole alphabet lifestyle. I have no idea where it's at today. It's like a million plus, but it's amazing how God, black, white, brown, male and female, he can redeem anyone. And actually, a new friend of mine, female, former trans male, who removed her breast, she's actually, as God has been healing her, is regrowing her breasts.
Mm.
And that's the first miracle of that I've heard globally. And some ladies in my prayer team were so excited because they've been praying for that, that even God can, we hear it through scripture, what Jesus was able to heal and restore, but to actually hear that a woman that removed her breasts, that they're actually God's growing them back, is just amazing. But anyway, these are
Yeah.
stories that God's doing here in America and around the world.
Man, it's so powerful. And there's kind of this piece within your story, and I think a lot of people can relate to this, especially people that have made mistakes in their life. You make a mistake and you feel like that's going to be the mark that is going to follow you the rest of your life, that you're never going to find someone that's going to love you because of that mark. I mean, you've talked about it, that even your partner had a bunch of different things going on medically, and God protected you from that. But then you get out of that, and now you're in this place. Well, okay, well, I live this lifestyle. Now who's going to want me because I live that lifestyle? And like, how am I going to find a wife, especially as, you're in your early 30s, if I recall correctly, and
Yeah.
most of the good ones are taken usually by that time. But
There's a lot of truth to that.
yeah, especially as a pastor, I'm not going to say anything, but
Yeah.
how did that transition kind of open up? How did God restore that peace when you met your wife at the admissions office?
So yeah, that was just absolutely epic. Now, when I started coming back to the Lord, that wasn't on my mind to get married and, just, turn into this heterosexual dude. But as I talked about, as those needs started getting met, developmentally that weren't met when I was little and older, and through some great, counseling, that, God just kind of told me, hey, when I start healing you, you can't lust after women like you've lusted after men. And as I restore you, now I'll be the first to say I am still tempted with same-sex attraction. That has not left. And that's a whole nother conversation, but it's why I wrote the second book. Our temptation doesn't define us. And I don't
Mm,
act out. I don't live in that lifestyle. I don't do that anymore. That's been, good grief, over 20 years, almost 25. But again, that's not our identity, is how we're tempted. I mean, I get tempted by all kinds of weird stuff, but again, our temptation isn't our identity. Um, so as that kind of changed and God started healing me, I, really started again taking on that manly role, the masculinity. But I also had men in my life, and Nathan, this is so key, men at the church that taught me how to not be afraid of a ball. I talk about that in my book,
mm,
because that's one reason why I didn't do well at sports. I'm afraid of the ball. Well, that's a problem. Well, they helped me overcome that fear. And another guy talked about dating. This is how you
mm,
date a woman. This is what you do. Kiss her on the first date. And I'm like, what? Kiss her? What? That's not godly. That's not Christian. I have all this garbage crap from all this bad Christian advice. And he's like,
mm,
no, they need to know you're interested. And if she's
mm,
not interested, move on. That's okay. But if you don't have that chemistry, find someone else. And so little things like that, men coming alongside of me and teaching how to do that. And I had a blast dating as the singles pastor. It was a lot of fun, but my heart was, now I was honorable, but my heart was, I wanted a woman that loved Jesus more than I did. And that's
mm,
really hard to find. And
yeah.
I found my wife, and when I met her, I saw Jesus in her eyes, and I kind of briefly told her my story, and it didn't freak her out, and I got her number, and I married her 9 months later.
Well, I think I find it funny that you kind of tricked her into getting her number, for getting her in the orchestra at your church, and then you felt bad,
Yeah,
and then you.
exactly.
I don't know.
Well,
There's
in all
something
honesty,
to that story.
yeah, so let me redeem that a little bit, because she had told me she was a semi-professional musician. She's an oboist. And I'm like, oh, we hire an orchestra. Let me get your number and I'll give it to our worship pastor. So I did get her number through covert means. Maybe Nathan is what you're alluding to.
Well, I
But
think it's
what
also
I
funny
ended up,
because the oboe isn't necessarily the one that you hire for the Christmas concert.
well, if you want to tune the orchestra, you do. But so mind you, I had no idea what an oboe was. She's like, "Oh yeah, it's a double reed instrument," and I'm like, "Oh yeah, that helps a lot." So anyway,
I think I read about the double
um,
reeds in Egypt, right? The double reeds. That's how they.
yes, exactly, exactly. It's where they found Moses. So I felt bad about calling her from because she gave me her cell number, and I'm like, okay, I've got to man up. That was really wimpy. I'm just gonna call, the main Azusa Pacific line, and I did. And I told them, I'm looking for, gave them her name, and her assistant answers the phone and says, "Who is this?" And I'm like, Pastor Jim Domen. I met her yesterday." And she's like, "Hold on a second." Puts me on hold, comes back. She goes, "She's in a meeting." And I'm like, "Oh, I'm getting blown off. Here's my number. Call me maybe. Um, so I leave her I give her my number, and I'm like, this ain't going anywhere. I was really actually kind of bummed. And later that day, about 4:30, 5 o'clock, I get a call, and she's like, "This is Amanda. You called me earlier." And I'm like, "Oh, hi, Amanda. Wow, I didn't think." And I'm like, "Are you married?" I don't know why that just blurted out of my mouth.
Yes,
What a
that's the
stupid
best
thing to
question to
say.
ask, by the way, when you
Yeah,
like a girl. Are you married? Do you want
yeah,
kids?
but I'm like, because all the good ones are taken, and I'm like, "Oh, I bet you she's married. I better find out," because I got her number, and she's like, "No, I'm not married." I'm like, "Oh, hey, do you want to go out sometime? I'd love to, take you out for coffee." And she's like, "Yeah, I'm open to dating, sure." And so, we set up a coffee, and I was so excited. And I'll never forget. No, she didn't tell me this to afterwards, but she goes, "I give the best hugs." The first time I met her, and we were talking, and Nathan, I knew I was gonna marry her.
Mm,
Again, I saw Jesus in her eyes. She loved the Lord, and she wasn't like a goody two-shoe Christian, if you know what I mean. She's just real, down to earth, and just loved God and loved Jesus. And
mm.
I could see it in her eyes, and she was just so kind and so sweet. So I give her a hug that night, but note to self, dudes: if God ever tells you you're going to marry this girl, don't tell that to them. I didn't. I've learned through the story of Joseph, you don't tell your brothers, "Hey, you're all going to be bowing down to me one day." No, keep those secrets between you and the Lord. Don't share that kind of info or intel. Anyway, yeah. So we dated, and yeah, 9 months later, that I met her in October. And actually in California, we were right in the battle. It was in 2008, and I was very much actively a part of changing California's constitution, Article 1, Section 7.5, that only a marriage between a man and a woman is valid or recognized. Now, that was
Mm.
back in 2008. And actually, I need to check, because I actually testified in Sacramento. I don't remember if they actually amended the Constitution or not through the vote. But there's actually a US Supreme Court case coming up with, I think it's Kim Davis from, I think she's Wisconsin or Minnesota, a registrar that took a stand on marriage.
Mm,
I'd love to see marriage get returned back to man, woman only. I think
mm.
any child deserves a mom and a dad. So that's a whole
Yeah.
nother conversation too. But and I got to tell you this, too. This is what's wild: getting married, having kids, homosexuality, and this whole gay stuff is just not even a part of our life. I
Mm,
forget that I was gay. And at times I'm like, did I really do that? Was that really me? Because it seems like it was so long ago. And that's, every night I'm tucking my kids into bed. I'm praying with them. We've been in soccer season. I've been coaching, and, coaching them, and doing all kinds of fun things like that, going on vacations. And this whole past is just really isn't part of our everyday life. And
mm.
that's a great thing. And again, and I shared this earlier, it doesn't mean I can't be tempted. And I would say, if people say, "Oh, I'm not tempted anymore," I think you're skating on thin ice.
Yeah.
I'd rather come from a point of humility that, yes, I could fall, rather than I've arrived, that's not going to happen to me. And I've got good men in my life that I can share and confess to when I do mess up. But most of the time, I'm asking forgiveness for my wife because of my tone, or I snapped at my kids, and I've got to ask them, "Will you forgive
Yeah.
daddy?" And that's probably more of my sin issues what I'm dealing with
Yeah.
now. So,
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that you were doing that in 2008, because you had a lot of stuff going on in 2008. You're getting your master's in divinity at the time. You're also training to do your Ironman triathlon, 140.6 grueling miles of work. And you're doing all of this in this season of life of rebuilding, and God is restoring. And, I find it really interesting during this time that there's a lot of stuff going on, and there's a lot of challenges to identity from what it sounds like. I'm curious, during that period of prepping for your Ironman, running the Ironman, doing your MDiv, what was God starting to stir inside of you to prep you for what was to come later on in life?
I'm a high achiever, if you haven't figured that out, kind of that entrepreneurial thing. I wanted to get fixed. I
Mm.
wanted, if I go to seminary, you can't get any higher. I mean, you can go to church, you can become a pastor, you can go to seminary. I mean, you can keep trying to kind of achieve these earthly goals to get closer to God, so to speak. And I'm like, God, I want to be fixed. And I'll unpack that in a second. But on the Ironman side of things, athletics, succeeding, it's funny. My dad did tries. He never did an Ironman. And when I'm like, hey, Dad, I'm doing Ironman, he's like, is this what this is all about? You trying to outdo me? I'm like, well, you said it, not me. I just want to kind of do the impossible, 140.6 miles. By the way, I did it in 13 hours and 52 minutes. And my whole family was there and they got tired watching me. They went back to the hotel and took naps and then came back out to
Supportive.
cheer me on as I never stopped except, T1, T2 to sit down and change from, biking shoes to running shoes kind of a thing. But that was really transitional or helpful in the sense of I was the president of Multisport Ministries and Men's Triathlon Club. But that identity of working with men, coming alongside of men, I was a safe person men could share battles, struggles, victories with. And so I kind of developed just this great discipleship mentoring and helping journeying with men with their issues as I was transparent and open with mine and my victories and failures. So it was
Mm.
kind of like this on both sides of the spectrum. So I'm actually getting all this practical stuff, training with men on runs and swims in the ocean and bikes through San Antonio Canyon in Orange County and through all the hills and going up to PCH all the way down to Huntington and Newport and Laguna and then back on the Santa Ana River Trail. I mean, I rode my bike all over Southern California, Orange County, with other men and trained with other men. And so men that were better than me, men that were at the same level, and ones that, were trying to, grow. And so that kind of played out in a great way of building my identity in my masculinity. On the divinity side of things, or maybe more on the spiritual side, so as I shared, I wanted to get fixed. And I ended up going to Israel and was in the Garden of Gethsemane. And I talk about this in my book, Not a Mistake, but I think it was so powerful and really mind changing and really understanding identity because my former life was really kind of my identity. And I kept going, God, why me? I've asked him for, then it was like 3 decades. Now I kind of got over it, but I'm 50, I'll be 52 soon. But for 30 years of my life, I begged and pleaded, why me? Why me? Why did I have to have this thorn in my flesh? And the
Mm.
Lord just so gently and kindly and graciously said, who else was in the Garden of Gethsemane begging not to have something done? And Matthew's account, it's a one-way conversation. Jesus is praying and pleading with God, not, take this cup from me, but not my will, but your will be done. And Matthew's account, we don't even hear God answering Jesus. And he's
Mm.
begging and pleading, not wanting to go to the cross, but he submits to the will of the Father and says, not my will, but your will be done. And I'm like, okay, God, that was Jesus. I ain't no Jesus. I'm a sinner. So this doesn't help me. And then the Lord, again, graciously and kindly said, who else pled 3 times, like Jesus did, that the thorn in his flesh would be removed? And
Mm.
I'm like, well, and this is why Paul, the Apostle Paul, is one of my heroes. And in that conversation, Paul writes God or records God saying, my grace is sufficient. My power is made perfect in weakness. And then Paul
Mm.
goes on, I'll boast all the more about my weaknesses. So I kind of took that on and, okay, I'm going to quit bitching and complaining about God, why me? And man up and own it and say, I'm going to be grateful for the thorn in my flesh because it's kept me humble. It's allowed me to receive blessings and not curses as I choose to follow and walk with God and follow the Spirit and not my depraved flesh. and I
Mm.
have to die to my flesh daily and walk in the spirit daily. And it's daily. And when I mean daily, it's not just in the morning. Sometimes it's throughout the entire day. But, God's mercies are new every morning. And I say that, Nathan, because I haven't arrived, but I would rather be in that position like Paul, boasting all the more gladly about my weaknesses so Christ's strength can rest upon me. Or I should say his grace. Yeah, his grace, as it's made perfect in weakness.
You and your wife have 3 beautiful kids.
Thank you.
I'm curious, what have you learned about yourself as going through fatherdom, of being a father, seeing your kids, seeing your daughter,
Yep.
seeing your
Great
sons?
question.
What changed in your perspective, the way that you saw yourself when you had kids? Especially, it's kind of this quasi thing because you become a dad and you see yourself as a dad, but then you also see your dad and the way that your dad interacted with you. And so it's this kind of quasi moment where you're going, this is the way that my dad treated me. This is the way that I want to treat my kids. What did you learn about yourself when you held your first child?
So I'll leave it back up. So like I tell my dad, if the Lord made me any better looking, I couldn't handle myself. And that's my healthy way to say I don't think I'm not that good looking. But great friend in San Diego, she goes, Jim, you and your wife need to have more kids. You make beautiful babies. I'm like, thank you, Penny. Anyway, so I'm throwing that out there because it's not about external beauty. It's what's in the inside that's important. But as this, what God has blessed us with, I've really been like, I want, and my book talks about this, not a mistake, about parenting differently. Now
Mm,
let me give you an example. And today it'd probably be considered abuse, but I don't think there's anything wrong with it. But, I got the wooden spoon, the belt, the Tabasco with my mouth and soap. I didn't swear for the longest time in my life because my mouth had been cleaned so much. I think any bad words were washed away. But, that's kind of how we were brought up. But we decided we're doing things differently. As I mentioned, none of our kids are on devices, or we're not watching TV and having them programmed, with demonic things, instead of things that are of God.
yeah.
And so we grew up watching TV, although there are certain shows we couldn't watch, but we've decided to do that differently. I am super intentional, and dads, if you're listening, it is so important, your relationship with you and your son, and if you have a daughter, that is also so critically important because that's how they're going to learn how to choose a good, godly, righteous man with your relationship with them. And that will
Mhm.
start early and build on. And my wife has told me multiple times, she goes, I cannot believe the relationship you have with our son and each of our daughters. It's so unique. You have such a strong bond and connectedness to them. But Nathan, I've been super intentional with that.
Mm.
I stunk at soccer, but you know what? All my 3 kids like to play soccer. So I coach, I go to their games, I go to all their practices. I'm there, I'm cheering them on, I'm supporting them. I worked from home for 10 years in the early part of their lives. Not everybody
Mm.
can do that. That was another blessing. So literally I worked from home, but I was with my kids, my family around the clock during those critical developmental ages. And I think that helps them build their identity, their masculinity for my son or their femininity as for my 2 daughters and just kind of what that looks like. And my daughters tell me stuff. My son tells me
Mm.
stuff, just between us. And that's a great place to be. I mean, I'm their parent. I'm not like trying to, and hope hear me. I'm not trying to tell parents you need to be friends with your kids, but it's that kind of a relationship that, yes, I'm the father. I am the disciplinarian. I've got the big booming voice when they don't want to listen to mom, but we back one another, we support one another. And again, we've raised our kids really differently than even how my wife was raised. Now, I'm
Mm.
not saying we were raised like, terrible or anything, but we've just learned and we've adapted and have been very intentional with being relational with our kids and focusing on what they're interested in, not what I want them to do or what I think they should do. We want to come and support their God-given gifts, talents, whatever that might look like, and kind of fan those flames within them.
Mm. Uh, I'm going to walk one thing back because
Yeah.
I want to ask you this next question, and it goes back to what I asked you just a second ago about your three kids, and I'm going to walk that back here, and you'll know why. You and your wife actually had 5 children together: baby Samantha, Aaliyah, baby Shane, Riker, Asher. My wife and I, we've both we've experienced miscarriages. You've experienced it in a very real way of holding baby Samantha, your first daughter, in your
Yep.
hands.
Yep.
And there is such a tremendous tearing of the heart when you go through that. I'm
Mm.
curious, how how do you support your spouse through that type of grief? But then also, how do you walk through that kind of grief?
Of anything I've done in my life, that has been the most devastating, hardest thing ever. Me, think about this. I was gay, come out of the lifestyle. I'm a pastor. I get married. We get pregnant. And then we end up holding a 16-week baby in our hands. It was a miscarriage at 16 weeks. And we saw our daughter, and she had little, you see the gums, you see the teeny tiny little toes and fingers and the nails, the lips. I mean, the whole little body's formed at 16. I mean, even before it's 16 weeks. And I'm holding Samantha in our hands, and it absolutely devastated us. I took a week off work, she took a week off work, and we literally just wept and cried for a week. I mean, we were a mess. And and it I am so pro-life, and I'll debate anybody, but anybody, and we had actually medical professionals that are complete idiots and morons, and so I can't so almost they literally said that it is a pile of tissue. And
Mm,
it's such a flippin' lie from the enemy. And for anyone, we've actually held baby Samantha at 16 weeks. It is a human, it is a baby that just has to live inside the womb. And it is everything a human. It has nothing to do with the pile of cells or a mass. I think they called it a mass of cells. And anyway, that was so infuriating. But we were so devastated, especially for our first. And what was hard, Amanda worked in an office with a lot of women, and everybody kept getting pregnant. Everybody kept getting
mhm,
pregnant and having babies, and we weren't getting pregnant, and we weren't able to have a child. So it was just devastating. And again, I think anything that I've gone through in this life, that has been the most devastating, hardest thing we had to go through.
mm,
Um, a dear friend of mine told me, he said, and he was younger than me, actually a roommate of mine, JD, he said, Jim, you now have another, I'll get choked up, another spiritual language where you can connect with people with loss and have lost children. I mean, I did a funeral for a triathlon buddy, great athlete, by the way. They had a full term stillbirth baby.
mm,
And it's like, oh my gosh, I just can't. And I did the memorial service. It rips your heart out. You know, it's not fair. It's not right. How does a good God allow these things to happen? And, you ask all these questions, and how can this be? And, thankfully, Amanda and I were able to get pregnant again, and we have our daughter, Aliyah. And then we lost our third pregnancy at 14 weeks, baby Shane.
mm,
And that was another, what's funny is evangelicals, and this is kind of a stereotype, but evangelicals, we talked before the show about Catholicism and stuff. I think Catholics have a better understanding of suffering and suffrage. It's kind of why I think they have Christ on the cross and the crucifix to remind them of the pain and suffering that we do go through in this life. Instead of we're all happy all the time. And so a lot of the Psalms are laments. But when we lost our second, I was sitting in the Kaiser Hospital parking lot, And the Archbishop of the Orange County Diocese called me about an event I was doing, and I told him, I said, Kevin, you called me, it caught me at a really bad time. We just found out we're losing our second baby, or third. And he said, Jim, let me encourage you. When the baby passes, I would like to come to your home and hold a memorial service. I don't want to tell you what to do, but I really think it's important to celebrate the life, although brief, of your son, and let you and your wife process that. And Nathan, that was the most beautiful thing. No evangelical offered this to us, and this is what just drives
Mm.
me nuts. For him to say, let me come to your home. I actually made a little coffin out of a wooden box. We put our baby in there, and he did a memorial service for my wife and I and my in-laws. And we got to celebrate those 14 weeks of baby Shane's life, who's now with the Lord, and grieve his loss appropriately, instead of kind of what I really felt on our first is it was just my wife and I crying for a week. We had no celebration of life or anything like that. And that
Mm.
really would have been helpful if, and I was on pastoral staff, if
Mm.
pastors would have came alongside of us and offered to do something like that. But again, now I feel like I have a deeper spiritual language. And when we've had friends go through epic losses like full term or losing children, is we're able to come alongside and hopefully minister a little bit more empathetically.
I think there's something really powerful about about what you just said, is that a lot of the things that we go through in life, a lot of the thorns, a lot of those moments of I like to call them the crucible moments of life, where God is
Yeah.
purifying pieces about you. And we may not like that process, but that process opens up opportunities down the road to be able to speak life into other people, to love on other people, to be able
Amen.
to say, hey, when, when a couple loses a child, like I remember, maybe not great timing, but I remember when we lost one of our children to a miscarriage. And I remember telling my wife, I said, this is going to be an opportunity for us to connect with other people that go through this, and we can encourage them and we can love on them. And this is a moment that God is giving us an opportunity, through this hurt, through this pain, to be able to connect with other people. And everything that you carry in life is an opportunity to do that. The harder the problem, the
Amen.
harder the situation, the better you are equipped to be able to speak life. It's kind of like, uh, I remember you talking about someone asking you about celibacy in church, and someone
Oh,
saying, "Well,
yes. About
should
their,
you? Maybe you're supposed to be celibate." And the,
no, they gave me a
people
verse
just
and hold on. No, they gave me a verse, and I'm like, it was the most hurtful thing. And I'm like, what? She's like, here, God gave me this verse to you, and it's just a verse on a piece of paper. So now I'm curious. I look it up, and it's like, you're to be a eunuch. I'm like, are you flipping kidding me? That, like, who comes up with this? I don't think
yeah.
that was from God, honestly. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but people that mean well, that are speaking into things that they shouldn't be speaking into. And I mean, realizing that the things that we go through in our life, those are the things that God is equipping us to speak into other people's lives. A really good friend of mine, she had a traumatic brain injury. She's had cancer numerous times. And the last time that she got cancer, when she went in, all the nurses kept coming in her room, and they kept saying, she kept saying, is something wrong? Because you guys keep coming in my room. Like, am I dying? And they're like, no, you're just the happiest person in the entire hospital. We just want to
Mm,
be in here instead of everywhere else. And the reason why she was like that is because she continued to look at every single trial in her life as an opportunity to use to speak into other people's lives. And that's
amen.
and that's something that I think is so key in your life, that all the pain, all the hurt, all the things that you've gone through, you've taken those things, God has taken those things, and he's truly planted beautiful flowers, beautiful fruit in your life. Even though we fall short, God still uses those things. Jim, I've really loved our conversation. There is so much wisdom in what you bring to a conversation. I know that our conversation is going to spark moments of transformation in many people's lives who are hearing this
Amen.
today. And I have one more question for you, but before I do ask it, for all of you guys listening, I want you to take a moment to go and connect with Jim. If you like Jim's story, if you want to hear more, go learn more by checking out his book, Not a Mistake, or Breaking Sin's Grasp. Or if you have younger kids, he has a great young kids book series for every age of a young child, which is called the Button Kids series. I was looking at it the other night and I thought, man, this is really great, being able to define what these things are when our culture just seems to be really haywire and all this stuff. And so go check him out. He's got some really great content to be able to equip you, especially if you have teenagers that are going to public school that are questioning things. He has a ton of information that can equip you to be able to walk with your kids through some of the darkest things that our world is really going through right now. So you can find all that information. I'm going to put it in the show notes here for you guys to connect. But Jim, so many of our listeners are trying to break free from things that are holding them back. And so
Yep.
I'm curious, um, for the person that is listening that feel like they've failed over and over and over, and they feel like it's impossible to break that hold, that captivity that they feel in their life, what would you say to them in truth and in encouragement today?
Keep fighting. Don't give up. And this is why I wrote the book that I did. And this is kind of the theme on breaking sin's grasp. Your temptation doesn't define you. Is I used to ask this question. It's from John chapter 5, the healing the paralytic man at the pool of Bethsaida. Jesus asks a crippled man, "Do you want to be healed?" And Nathan, I'm like, I literally say this in my book. What a stupid question. Of course, if you're crippled, you can't. Well, of course, you want to get healed. But after being in ministry for more than 2 decades, you know what I've come to realize? I know why Jesus asked him. It was not a rhetorical question. Is because people do not want to be healed. They don't want to be set free. And so again, you've got to kind of unpack that. Is, well, if you keep doing the same sin over and over and over again, you're missing something. And that was kind of the premise of the book. Is, do you want to be healed? Are you willing to go through the process as you, and I love this word that you use on your show, the crucible? Are you willing to go do the tough work, go through the trial, go through the pain, go through the refinement process to really break free and walk in freedom? I mean, we have that immediately with Jesus. Paul talks about in Romans, anyway, I can't have time to unpack all that, but we get to choose to walk in the spirit and not in the flesh. And so my book addresses that. And I want to encourage you, you can be healed, but first you have to choose, I want to be healed. I want to be set free from this sin. But you may not be set free from the temptation, but you can choose righteousness. You can choose the spirit and not the flesh. You can choose life. You can choose not to choose death. But that's up to you. And my book, and I mean, I wrote a whole book on it to help articulate that. But that's breaking sin's grasp. Your temptation doesn't define you.
It really is one thing to talk about change, and we all talk about change. We talk that we want change, but it's a completely different thing to actually live that change. I love the word repent, to do a 180, to turn, to run the other way. I think of Potiphar's wife and Joseph. He left his coat. He ran. I'm out of here.
Yep.
And a lot of us, there are things inside of our life that we just need to turn and we need to run away. There are a lot of things in our life that we just need to, we need to make the decision, not just the decision, but we actually need to make the action that happens behind it. And today's conversation really does remind us that freedom isn't found in perfection of trying to perfect the way that we think necessarily, but it's about actually performance. It's about doing something different. It's about making a change. And not only that, it's about surrender. It's about surrendering and letting God define and redefine who we are and what we're capable of. So I really love this conversation. It's been so great. Before we wrap up though, for all of you listening, I really do hope that you stop for a moment and you stop running from who you are. Step into
Yep.
who God has created you to be today, because that is what living more than before is all about. This episode has challenged us. It has encouraged us. If it's challenged you or encouraged you today, would you share this with someone? Share this with someone that needs to hear the words that Jim said today, because you were created for a purpose, on purpose, and God wants to define who you are. Don't let the world define it. Let God define who you are. So until next time, remember to be more, see more, and experience more than before.